I want to talk about the response now to the Donald Trump speech and kind of different people's takes on it, a little before, a little after, and all of those things. The first is just strange. Steve Bannon had this correspondent on his show, and before Trump went out to announce he was running for president for a third time, she was saying that the fact that some TV stations aren't going to cover the entire speech is proof that we don't have a First Amendment in this country.
I think we've seen those games throughout the 2020 campaign. They don't want the American people to hear directly from, the biggest leader of the greatest political movement in our history. So I do suspect they'll try to, censor and cut away. However, the people are anxious to hear from him, so they will go right around the major networks if they do indeed cut away. They'll go to Real America's Voice, they'll go to RSBN, they'll go to OAN, so many other independent media, because that's what you have to do now. I mean, we do not have the First Amendment. It's under attack.
So because media companies don't cover the entire speech, we don't have a First Amendment. So the First Amendment mandates that whenever Donald Trump wants, he can get full national coverage of what he's saying. That makes no sense. And this just further highlights what we talked about before with this misunderstanding, seemingly, on the right of what the First Amendment is. Now, I think you can critique, separate from the First Amendment, matters of speech within societal contexts. For example, say, I don't think it's fair that Twitter's terms of service created a situation where Trump was taken off. And you can make that argument if you would like to. That's different than saying Trump getting taken off of a private company's platform because they don't have to have anyone on their platform under the law is a violation of the First Amendment that applies to what the government can and cannot do. That distinction is really hard for a lot of people on the right to understand, and this is an even more dramatic example of that. Because CNN may not give complete, unfiltered access to their platform, or MSNBC or whoever it is, through this speech to Trump, that is a huge violation of his First Amendment right. Very strange, very, very strange. Here's someone on Fox News who doesn't have the most... on Maria Bartiromo's show, which is notable because she is one of the hardest, most aggressive cheerleaders for Trump, or at least has been in the past, who doesn't have the best take on Trump.
That's the thing that people keep pushing back on. They don't want to go into a whole nother storm of hate, and there is Trump derangement syndrome.
Right. There's definitely and I think he started even that last night. He started with the China virus. He started with, poking names at DeSantis. We've heard that, and people are tired of it. Look, I also think that, DeSantis and Youngkin, like you said, are really the future of the party, right? They're in a generation that I think needs to come forward. And as much as, his policies were good, Trump's policies were good in the first term, I don't think the majority of the country really wants to go back there. I'll tell you, I live in Florida. Florida's fully behind DeSantis, no matter what Trump wants to tell you. They are fully behind DeSantis.
It's interesting.
So again, Maria Bartiromo has been just a huge supporter of Trump over the last few years. And so for her to give access to one of the people on her panel to say that, and she's not pushing back, is very fascinating, because it just shows you the shift on even networks like Fox News on the topic of Donald Trump. Sort of awkward element of this, Ivanka Trump did not show up to the announcement and said herself she's not going to be a part of this campaign. Ivanka Trump, reading from NBC News, who was a senior White House advisor during the Trump administration, says she's taking a break from politics. Interesting time to take a break. Former President Donald Trump's eldest daughter did not attend his speech Tuesday night at his Mar-a-Lago in Florida, where he announced his 2024 bid for the White House. She said later that she won't be participating in his third presidential campaign. Quote, I love my father very much. This time around, I am choosing to prioritize my young children and the private life we are creating as a family. I do not plan to be involved in politics, she said in a statement. So that's fascinating, because if you remember, Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner were two of the most active members of the Trump administration during his time in the White House. And so for them to be stepping away, or at least publicly Ivanka's announcing at least she will be stepping away in this next campaign, is definitely notable and shows, I think if they thought he had a really good chance of winning, they would be more excited about being behind him. But maybe they see what the rest of America, or a lot of America, sees, hopefully, which is that Trump should not be in power once again. Here is Brendan Buck, even though, let's be clear, they enabled and supported his agenda every step of the way. Brendan Buck highlighted an interesting point, saying, let's suppose for a second there's a real challenge to Trump for the 24 nomination. And let's suppose someone actually does beat him in the primary, or in that primary. What then are the chances Trump wouldn't entirely sabotage that person in the general election? So that's an interesting point that we get to start thinking about now that he is officially announced, is if someone runs against him and actually somehow defeats him, even though I think he still has better odds despite recent polling. I just think he's good at taking down competitors in these types of situations. But let's say someone does defeat him, like Ron DeSantis. I think Trump's ego will not allow him to do what normal people do after a primary, which is endorse whoever ended up prevailing in your party's primary. I don't think he'll do that. I think he would bring the entire Republican Party down with him, which would be beautiful to see. And another interesting thing that happened during this, even Fox News cut away from his speech and didn't just let his entire speech be aired during the event. Take a look at this.
Remember I sent to Angela. Remember Angela? Do you remember Angela? Nobody's remembering her now. Angela.
Who says who? Sorry, I cut in at a bad time. Let's put that back a second.
Angela Merkel.
Just joining us, President Trump in Mar-a-Lago announcing his 2024 presidential run.
Remember I sent.
So then not allowing him to continue, just like the CNNs and MSNBCs did, that they were so much against earlier in the night. And let's see here, one more from CNN, a former Trump advisor saying what I was saying, which is, this is very boring.
Sarah, you seem to have a pretty similar reaction last night to Jeb Bush, who, of course, was in turn kind of mocking Trump, saying, what a low-energy speech by the Donald. Time for new leaders. What'd you think?
Yeah, I mean, it was just that. It was low energy, uninspiring. I mean, during my time working for President Trump, I've watched him give hundreds of speeches over the 2 years that I worked for him. And that was by far one of the most boring. I mean, he himself seemed boring while giving this speech.
A former White House press secretary under Trump.
And you could tell he was trying really hard to stay on script, but then he started to get bored and started to ad-lib, and it just turned into a rambling mess, in my opinion.
Yep, a rambling mess indeed. And finally, Fox and Friends this morning getting very confused when trying to decipher how they should message on this announcement.
I think there's so much stuff here. Where do you start? It's 721 days before November 5th, 2024. So
okay, let's just wait to see how it goes before we take a side. Interesting. And then to wrap it all up, I may have said that was the final thing. Joe Biden coming in and dropping this while Trump was announcing. Dark Brandon moment.
Ever done what we've done in the last 4 years.
Their entire economic plan, tax cuts for the rich and corporations.
And record-breaking unemployment.
The worst jobs report on record.
Trump is the only modern president to leave office with fewer jobs than when he took office.
The Trump administration formally asking the Supreme Court to overturn the Affordable Care Act. This could leave up to 23 million Americans without coverage.
I hope that they end. It'll be so good if they end.
You also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
Do you believe in punishment for abortion? Yes or no?
There has to be some form of punishment.
For the woman?
Yeah, there has to be some form. And if I win, we will treat those people from January 6th fairly. And if it requires pardons, we will give them pardons.
Ooh. Now, as I've said before, a lot of the stats you can cite if you include COVID economically in Trump's time as president will make him out to be garbage for the economy because COVID tanked those statistics for sure. But I've said before, any president would have seen a huge downturn economically if they oversaw the pandemic. And that is something we accept for Trump. But then what it caused later under Biden, Republicans are incapable, I should say, to accept under Biden. Of course, that is not surprising. But I do think that type of messaging is important. highlight the ways in which Trump failed the American people and say, do you want that again? And then tout your own successes next to it as much as possible. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to be a part of what makes this show possible, plus get access to the full video version of the show hours before any of the clips are uploaded to YouTube, plus get access to an extra full show every Saturday that only members can see, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Luke Beasley. That's patreon.com/Luke Beasley, and there is a link in the description.